All right, this lesson then takes us to the next step, which is the process of making and voting on motions. So in the end of the last lesson, I talked a little bit about the order of things. So let's dive down a little bit deeper into that. The first thing is that we're going to note on the agenda that we have a certain number of items that actually require a motion. So here's kind of a script, and this is pretty close to what will actually happen in a well-managed board meeting. First of all, the chair says, I'd ask for a motion on this item to start our discussion. A member says, I move that. And a second member says, I second the motion. So now we can have the conversation, and the chair simply says, discussion on the motion, please. So the discussion happens, and then when the chair has decided that enough perspectives have been shared, enough information has been shared, then the question is called. And so the chair usually says something like, you don't have to follow this exactly, but something like, I'll call the discussion to a close. Please reread the motion. Now that's a request of the recording secretary of the board to read the motion as it was originally stated. Chair says, thank you. All in favor. So now we're calling the question by asking for a vote. All in favor, opposed, and you can use different words here, all in favor and against. And then abstaining, which means that you have any members that choose not to vote. And then the chair declares the meeting as either carried or passed or approved, or the alternative is defeated. So there's lots of different words here that are equally as acceptable. Carried and defeated are usually the two most common. It's what you'll see in Robert's Rules. It will see what you see in, it's also what you see in parliamentary procedure. So now one of the questions that comes up is that's if everything just goes really finely, but sometimes after we have a discussion, we want to make a change to the original motion. So how do we go about doing that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is the person who originally made the motion is going to amend it. So you can have a conversation about how it should be read, what the amendment should be, and that's fine. But it is in fact the member that made the initial motion that says, I would propose an amendment to the original motion to read. And it's helpful if you're that member to jot down the actual wording of the motion that you think is what everybody has had the conversation. Now sometimes it's one person making the amendment, sometimes it's a whole bunch of people giving input to that member. We do not have to rescind a motion or withdraw a motion or do any of those things. That's overkill. Simply say, let's amend the motion, have a conversation, agree what the wording is, and then have the member who originally made it make the change. The second member who originally seconded, if that person's still comfortable doing that, says, I second the motion. And sometimes you'll say, I second the motion as amended, so that helps the recording secretary be absolutely clear. The chair then says, thank you. Any discussion on the amended motion? So this is pretty important because there might be a tweak to the motion. We might go back and forth. The member who made the initial motion might make another or a second amendment to that. Make sure your recording secretary is okay and keeping up with this because it can go pretty quickly, and we want to make sure that what gets into the minutes is actually accurate. And then finally, if there's no discussion, the chair will say, I will call the question, please reread the motion, and then finally all in favor, opposed, abstaining, and then the chair will declare it as either carried or defeated. Now remember, as a recording secretary, you need to make sure that recording secretary is showing how the motion actually ended. It's not any good to just say, in favor, opposed, abstaining, and then there's blank air after that. So it needs to be declared as either carried or defeated. All right, so one of the things that happens sometimes is that it gets a little furry around the edges. And so someone makes a motion and then there's some conversation about that, and someone will say, do you really mean you want to say that? Don't you want to say this instead? If that motion has not been seconded, so it's just on the table and something happens to the motion, but it hasn't been seconded, then the motion can simply be withdrawn. Now it become withdrawn by the member who made it, and then the chair will declare the motion to be withdrawn. And very very often then what we have is we have a second motion or a new motion following it. Any motion that's made and has been seconded, however, has to be withdrawn by the member making the motion with the agreement of the seconder. So we had a little layer of bureaucracy here, and usually what happens is say, Madam Chair, I will withdraw that motion with the permission or agreement of the seconder. So it's fairly informal, but again, the minutes show that the motion was withdrawn and that the seconder was in agreement. And then the chair has to ask an important question, is the chair has to ask if there are any objections, and there being none, the motion is withdrawn. If there is an objection to withdrawing the motion, then you just simply need another motion to approve the withdrawal of the motion. So we're starting to get some layers here. Now, I made a recommendation to you earlier, and that is get an electronic copy of Robert's Rules of Order abridged and have it in the board meeting and all committee meetings during the conversation, because it can be really helpful to flip forward. My own copy of Robert's Rules, which is a paper copy, has a whole bunch of stickies on it that are my little table of contents for the things that sometimes that come up more often than not that I want to be able to refer to quickly. So we want to make sure that we do this properly, because this is the orderly way of doing business. So if a motion has been seconded and there's a conversation that says, no, I think the motion's fine the way it is, I think we should vote on it, or I think we should have a conversation about it. And if there's a feeling in the room from the chair's perspective that we need to withdraw the motion, then the chair will simply say, I would accept a motion to withdraw the original motion. It's seconded, you vote on the withdrawal, and then you come back to square one where you talk about what's the motion that we actually want to have on the table, how should it read, what should it be about. Now, motions to table an agenda item. So this essentially says sometimes we run out of time. This is the most common scenario. Sometimes we run out of time, we just simply don't have time to deal with some later items on the agenda or less important items on the agenda. So we just need a motion to table a particular item. Sometimes we get into a conversation, we realize we can't finish it, we need information, we need to ask our executive director to do some research, we need to refer it to a committee. Any of those things are possible, so we table it, and that disposes of it off of our agenda and essentially says we are going to put it in a different time, and sometimes we're actually going to put it in a different place. So the motion to table might also include a motion to refer to a particular committee or to delegate a member of the board or the executive director or a staff member to gather information or do some task related to the motion. So again, a motion to table, a seconder, and a vote to agree to table the motion. Now, this is a part of kind of sloppy practice in many boards, is that the motion to adjourn is an actual motion. You've opened the meeting and you have an open meeting until you have a motion to close it. So very often it's the chair who simply declares the meeting adjourned. The proper way to do it is the chair asking, I would entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting, and somebody says so moved, somebody says seconded, all in favor, there's a show of hands, and we are done. So wrap your meeting up to make sure that we actually had a formal closure to the meeting. Let's talk for a second then about how do we rescind motions. Rescinded motions are applied only after we have had a vote. So we've carried a motion, we've done something with it. So there's been a motion, a seconder, discussion, and a vote, and the vote has carried the motion. And now we realize, and this can happen in the same meeting, it very often happens, the next month's meeting or sometimes several months' meetings, where we realize that motion was in error. And we can't roll the clock back, but what we can do is create a new motion that rescinds the original motion that was carried earlier in the meeting or 3 months ago or whatever the time frame was. So again, we move, we second, we discuss, and then we vote. So it's a relatively straightforward process to rescind a motion. You don't need to rescind motions that haven't been voted on. You simply withdraw them or you amend them, whichever you would find is the best or most appropriate thing to do. So let's then talk talk about points of order. A point of order is when any member identifies that something has not gone right in terms of the following of the rules. And there, in any board meeting, even if with a really good chair, you can have multiple little infractions or violations or things that we forget to do. One of the most common one is to have no seconder. Now you can have a seconder at later on after the discussion if you want to. Usually it's motion, seconder, discussion, vote. So that's the order of things, but sometimes the chair simply forgets to call for a seconder. And so a point of order might be made by a member to say, Madam Chair, I'm aware that we didn't have a seconder on that motion. Now on every board there should be one person who is alert to those kinds of details. So it's really good if you've got somebody who's kind of your stickler for right process, who is on high alert for things that are not entirely managed in the way we need to. Now if you're a chairperson and you're thinking, oh, I didn't know it was this complicated, there's some really good courses online, and in many communities there's actually live courses on how to chair meetings. There are business courses and business training programs that talk about chairing meetings. There are some awesome online references that will give you some additional help. I can tell you as a board member that I really appreciate a chair who manages meetings effectively. It makes it a pleasure to come to a board meeting. It makes me feel we've made good use of my time. It makes me feel comfortable in contributing, but it also helps me make sure I sit back and listen to what other board members have said. And it really is the tone that's set by the chair that makes those kinds of things happen. Final point in this section is that I want to talk a little bit about privilege, points of privilege. Points of privilege is when a member can interrupt the chair or any other member. So if we're in the middle of something, and you're aware that there's a whole bunch of people coming in and they're in the hallway and they're having a loud conversation and it's very distracting to the board, you can simply say, Madam Chair, point of privilege, could we close the door, or could we ask the group in the hallway to pipe down, or whatever it is. This is how we deal with minor inconvenience in boards, and we might in fact want to make sure that you can ask a point of privilege, for example, on something like, can I reread the motion? So point of privilege, could we reread the motion? Entirely fine for board members to do that. Now if that language feels a little bit old school and a little bit just plain old, choose other words. It's just fine. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, board members don't have to sit through inconvenience. If the room is too hot, if the room is too cold, if it's too noisy, any of those things can be dealt with by board members. So don't feel like you're interrupting the process in an inappropriate way. Realize that control of your environment makes good board meetings happen, and so very important that you take that role on, and it is part of your responsibility as a board member. Let's move now to a short section on types of votes. Just want to make sure that we understand the different types of voting that we can use. One that is often used in large group environments, an annual general meeting where you might have 20, 30, 50, or 150 or 500 people in your annual meeting, very often to just simply vote by voice. And you can say A, meaning yes, or no, and the chair should instruct, say all members voting in favor, say yes, or say aye or A, so that the members who are voting know what word to say, and then nay or no, either of those are fine. Most common is a show of hands in board meetings, so it's just simply a quick show of hands. But one of the things we want to do is, if it's not a unanimous vote, so if you 10 board members, unanimous is everybody votes in favor or votes against. If it's a split vote where you have 8 people voting in favor, 2 people voting against, it's important that you do a count of the show of hands. This is a form of what we call a recorded vote. So the chair should say, all in favor, hold your hands please. And the recording secretary goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against, 2 people hold their hands up. Hold your hands, please. 1, 2. Nobody abstaining, and that gets recorded in the minutes. So what we're actually doing is showing a recorded vote, 8 in favor, 2 against, 0 abstaining, and that shows up as a part of the official record. By the way, the chair still needs to declare that motion to be carried. Now, one of the other options is a secret ballot, and this is a sheet of paper. It can say yes or no. It can say in favor or against or abstaining. It can be just a scrap of paper. It doesn't have to be a formal ballot, but it should be folded, handed to the chair, and the chair will simply open the ballots and say, I declare the motion to be carried. If you want a record of what the motion is, 6 in favor, 2 against, 2 abstaining, that's perfectly fine. If it's a unanimous declaration of the motion, the chair can also announce that. Now, one of the things that I've seen in large group meetings where an actual show of hands is very difficult is the use of a voting card. This is usually a fairly colorful card, and the cards can be color-coded. Green means yes, red means no, and yellow means abstaining, or black sometimes means abstaining. And if you can imagine a hotel meeting ballroom of 500 people, it's really helpful to be able to put a card in the air and be able to see a whole room of green cards, a partial room of red cards, a partial room of maybe a half a dozen black cards. And what we've done then is we've actually been able to say very clearly by visual inspection, without actually having to count the number of votes in favor, against, or abstaining, it can be very quick for the chair to be able to declare, I declare the motion carried, or I declare the motion to be defeated if the red cards outnumber the green cards. If there is any doubt, if it looks like maybe half and half are green and red, then in fact put the red card up and you have somebody at the front of the room or some people in the aisles, because large meetings are usually our aisles, count the number of green cards, and each person as they are counted puts their card down. So there's lots of ways of making sure that we honor the democratic process. We want to now talk a little bit about recorded votes. There's a number of ways of doing things. Normally we simply declare a motion to be carried or defeated based on the number of hands that are in the room, and there's really no need for counting. However, any member in a meeting at any time can ask for a recorded vote, and there's essentially 2 kinds of recorded votes. One is based in numbers, so 6 in favor, 2 against, 2 abstaining, that's based in numbers, so it's one form of a recorded vote, and the recording secretary actually writes those numbers down. The other option is to show the names of the members who are voting in favor, against, or abstaining. So the names of the people voting in favor are shown in the minutes, the names of the people voting against are shown in the minutes, and so on. And that can be helpful if there's any issue of concern around liability. If a board member is voting against something out of conscience and worried about the potential of liability exposure of the organization or of the board, it is sometimes very reassuring to say I voted against it and there's my name in the minutes that says I actually voted against it. So it's a formal legal record that says some of the board members actually voted against this particular motion, and here are their names. All right, so that's the end of this lesson. Continue on to the next lesson. See you there.